Hi, it's Eric here from NHS Global. Today I'd like to talk about vitamin D, more specifically vitamin D3. Many people know of vitamin D, and some may know that vitamin D exists in two forms, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. But far less know about the difference between these two forms, and many have totally wrong misconceptions about how these two forms of vitamin D differ from each other. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a basic overview of what vitamin D is, explain what it does, and clarify some points of confusion about this vital nutrient. The topics I'll be discussing include: what is vitamin D and what's so confusing about it? What's the difference between the vitamin D2 and vitamin D3 forms? What are the dietary sources of vitamin D? What's the difference between the recommended dose and the optimal dose? And finally, why taking a vitamin D3 supplement is the best way to meet our vitamin D needs. So let's begin. What's so confusing about vitamin D? Well, first of all, vitamin D is not actually a vitamin at all. Vitamin D actually refers to a group of fat-soluble steroids, which are not vitamins, but rather are pre-hormones, similar to steroids, but with broken rings. In humans, the most important compounds in this group are cholecalciferol, commonly known as vitamin D3, and ergocalciferol, commonly known as vitamin D2. Cholecalciferol, the animal form, is synthesized in the body, while ergocalciferol, the plant form, is not. A vitamin is defined as a nutrient which is necessary for the proper functioning of the body's tissues, but which cannot be produced by the body. So according to this definition, vitamin D3, which can be synthesized by the body, cannot be considered a true vitamin. Vitamin D was originally misclassified as a vitamin because of the findings of a British researcher in 1920 who raised dogs in the winter without any exposure to sunlight or ultraviolet rays. He found that unless these dogs were fed a diet containing fish liver oils, they developed rickets, a deformative bone disease characterized by bowed legs and knock knees. He wrongly concluded that the fat-soluble substance needed for developing healthy bones was not found naturally in the body, and so therefore he mistakenly proclaimed it a vitamin. In 1924, researchers discovered that exposing skin to sunlight resulted in the body's own production of this so-called fat-soluble vitamin. Hence, for nearly 100 years, it's been known that vitamin D is not a true vitamin. But despite the misnomer, for nutritional and public health reasons, vitamin D continues to be officially classified as a vitamin. Semantics aside, vitamin D, like all vitamins, most definitely has numerous very important biological functions. Vitamin D is responsible for increasing intestinal absorption of calcium and also magnesium and phosphate. Vitamin D is also involved in regulating the body levels of phosphorus as well as the utilization of calcium. Vitamin D also supports a healthy immune system and also plays a role in anti-aging. The most important concept to understand about these vitamin D functions is that all of them are accomplished through the use of specialized proteins which vitamin D stimulates the production of. In other words, vitamin D's real function is to produce some specialized proteins, and it is these proteins that actually do the work that is associated with vitamin D functions. We'll dive deeper into how this works in a moment, but first we need to discuss vitamin D biochemistry and how we get vitamin D into our bodies. Humans can take in vitamin D 4 different ways: by consuming natural foods, by consuming fortified foods, by exposure to sunlight, and by taking vitamin D dietary supplements. The truth is that we really can't get the amount of vitamin D our bodies need from natural and even fortified foods, so there are only two practical ways to get sufficient vitamin D: by exposing our bare skin to sunlight and by taking vitamin D supplements. For the sake of completeness, however, we'll briefly discuss natural and fortified food sources of vitamin D. Natural food sources of vitamin D include the flesh of high-fat saltwater fish such as cod, herring, salmon, tuna, and sardines. Liver oils from these fish, particularly cod, are among the best natural food sources of vitamin D. But even so, they are quite insufficient to meet all our vitamin D needs. Because the average person's diet is very low in vitamin D, foods such as milk, margarine, butter, and cereals have been fortified with vitamin D since the 1930s. Milk in the United States is fortified with 10 micrograms, 400 IU, of vitamin D per quart. It's usually a mix of vitamin D2 and D3. Prior to the 1930s, rickets was a major public health problem in the United States. Rickets is now very uncommon, which can certainly be considered a significant public health achievement, but does not mean that eating vitamin D fortified foods will satisfy our vitamin D requirements. In fact, quite the contrary is true. The amount of vitamin D contained in fortified foods is most certainly not nearly enough to satisfy all our needs. Thus, exposure to sunlight and taking vitamin D supplements are the only practical ways to meet our vitamin D needs. Exposure to sunlight, actually the ultraviolet B spectrum of sun rays, also known as UVB, triggers vitamin D synthesis by converting 7-dehydrocholesterol in our skin to cholecalciferol. Sun rays during a summer midday contain the most UVB rays. However, during the early and later parts of summer days, and during most winter days, sunlight enters the atmosphere at a less than optimal angle, essentially blocking UVB rays, which make it impossible for our skin to produce vitamin D under these conditions. A good rule of thumb is, if your shadow is shorter than you are tall, as is the case of a summer midday, you can make vitamin D. But if your shadow is longer than you are tall, as is the case of early and late parts of a summer day, or during any time of most winter days, you cannot make much vitamin D. When exposed to summer midday sun, our bodies can produce 10,000 to 25,000 IU of vitamin D very quickly, ranging from just 15 minutes in a very fair-skinned person to a couple of hours in a dark-skinned person. This is about half the time it takes for skin to begin to burn. We make the most vitamin D when we expose a large area of our skin, such as our backs, rather than a small area such as our face or arms. Research to date shows that moderate but frequent sun exposure is healthy. However, overexposure or intense exposure can increase the risk of getting skin cancer. So it's very important to guard against this kind of exposure. Many populations throughout the world are exposed to quite suboptimal levels of sunlight, especially during the winter months, which reduces their exposure to UVB sun rays. Clearly, for most of us in today's modern societies, it's difficult to get enough full-body UVB sun exposure to meet our vitamin D needs. On the days we can't get enough sun exposure, and for those who are worried about the risk of skin cancer from over or intense sun exposure, taking a vitamin D supplement is an excellent option to safely and effectively get the vitamin D our bodies need. When it comes to supplementing with vitamin D, many people are confused about which form of vitamin D is better, vitamin D2 or vitamin D3. The confusion surrounding this topic persists for two main reasons. First of all, doctors often prescribe vitamin D2 and not vitamin D3 to their patients. This has led many people to jump to the false conclusion that vitamin D2 is the superior form. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Secondly, some people, particularly vegans and vegetarians, incorrectly assume that vitamin D2, the plant form, must be more suitable than vitamin D3, the animal form. Again, nothing could be further from the truth. Vitamin D2 is actually far less effective than vitamin D3 is in promoting calcium absorption, because the metabolites produced from vitamin D2 do not bind nearly as well to vitamin D binding proteins as the vitamin D3 metabolites do. Vitamin D2 is also half as effective at improving vitamin D status than is vitamin D3. Both of these points will make more sense shortly when I explain in more detail how vitamin D works. But even before doing so, If these points are not enough to convince you that vitamin D supplementation is preferable to supplementing with vitamin D2, the pièce de résistance is that vitamin D2 has much greater toxicity potential than does vitamin D3. More on this when we take a deeper dive into vitamin D toxicity. NHS Global has been producing D-Max, our vitamin D3 product, since 2003. D-Max is a 5,000 IU vitamin D3 product derived from lanolin and comes in a 250 count bottle. D-Max was formulated to be the perfect one-to-one complement to VK2. That's NHS Global's vitamin K2 product. D-Max can be taken by itself, but it's recommended to take 1 capsule of D-Max for each capsule of VK2. They should be taken together at the same time. For additional information, please visit vitamin-d-max.com or call toll-free 877-965-2140.